Pretty recently, I hosted a series of free one-on-one consultations for entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs around the world. Some to see if they wanted to be a part of one of my programs, some just as a way to help people out, others because it's interesting for me to see what everyone is up to. So recently I was on a consultation call with a would-be entrepreneur from Europe, and within a couple minutes of the call, I had to do something which I don't usually do on my calls, is cut her off and say, listen, we're not going to talk about your business. This idea you have, it could be the best thing ever, it could be the worst thing ever, it doesn't matter. What you really need to focus on is what you brought up in the first couple minutes of this call, which is ADHD or whatever it is, because she hadn't been diagnosed and it's not my place necessarily to diagnose someone on an initial meeting, but whatever it is that's keeping you from focusing, from following through, and ultimately being the kind of person that's required to build any kind of business. And until that's dealt with, the rest doesn't really matter. Now, I'm calling this video the ADHD cycle, but it could really apply to any number of personality traits. It could be called the ENFP cycle. It could be called the anxiety cycle. What I want to explore with you is how certain types of behavior and traits can compound on themselves and build and build and build. And sometimes that builds into this incredible life for people, and sometimes it builds into a pretty abysmal life. And that figuring out these root causes is one of the most powerful things you can do to make a transformation in your life. So let's set up a goal. Let's say the goal of this imaginary person we're going to talk about today, his name is of course going to be Bob. If you're a fan of the channel, you know that. And Bob's goal is to spend as much time as possible doing things he loves while growing as a person. That's the ultimate goal. Making money, building a great life, all that, also important to Bob, but the ultimate goal is just to spend more time doing what he's good at and what he loves doing. But Bob has ADHD. And ADHD screws with Bob's head and makes it tough for him to stay focused, to avoid distractions, and it turns out a bunch of other things. Now, before we get into the details of Bob, let's define what is required to build a life where you can spend a lot of time doing things you love and keep growing as a person. Well, I'm going to throw out 5 things here. You're free to argue, or instead of arguing, why don't you add to the comments below other things that might be important here. The first is focus. You have to be able to direct your focus to do those things you love. Otherwise, you're not going to do them. The second is time. That seems obvious enough. The third is confidence, because in my experience, if you don't believe in yourself, you're going to spend a lot of time second guessing, rethinking, avoiding, etc., etc. And that's ultimately going to mean that no matter how much time and focus you have, you're not going to spend that time doing whatever it is that's important to you. The fourth is a big one here. I'm mixing peer groups and accountability. It's very hard to be a writer, an artist, an entrepreneur all on your own. I don't know many people who have done it, although of course, if they were some hermit doing it, I would not know them. So maybe there's actually more great entrepreneurs and writers locked away in caves that don't know anyone. But all the people I know go out of their way to grow their peer group and have that kind of support. And the fifth is money, because, well, if I need to explain that to you, maybe this video might be getting a little too advanced for you. But really, money is actually more important than we think, because if you're always stressed about money, and I can say this as someone who's grown a business when I've been really broke and been in positions where I'm not too worried about money here and there. And the times when you're really worried about it, smaller things can stress you out a lot more. You know, you owe $30 and it comes up, and then you're thinking about that for an hour or whatever else, right? Problems can come up a lot more. And while money cannot buy happiness, money does tend to help solve problems. And that allows you to go back and refocus on what's really important to you. So we have these 5 things that we're going to say are required in order to build this life that Bob wants. And you might think, okay, well, ADHD probably makes it tough to focus. And so that's one thing, but there's all these other elements to this. And so it's maybe not that big of a deal. Like, yeah, maybe Bob wants to take some medication or start exercising every day or changing his diet or any number of things that have been shown to help with ADHD. But it's not the be all and end all. He could also ignore it, as many people do, and just say, yeah, okay, that's one thing I have going on, but it doesn't define me, et cetera, and I'm going to go kick some ass and do what I got to do. Which, by the way, is a great attitude. But it may be an attitude that is holding Bob back, because the thing with traits, and whether it's the traits coming from ADHD or from personality, I'm an ENFP, we like new things, we like changing direction and taking on new possibilities. Whatever that trait could be for you, they usually have effects far beyond what we imagined. So, of course, Bob with ADHD might have trouble focusing, and pretty naturally that might lead us to number 2, time. Well, if someone's not great at organizing themselves and planning and figuring out, one of the traits with ADHD is not being great at estimating time, how long things will take. And sometimes we think things will take way longer than they will, so we put them off and avoid them when we could really just do it in 5 minutes. Other times we will assume something shouldn't take very long at all, and then when we get to it, it takes so long, and then we end up being late for something or whatever else, right? Time can become a problem. So let's assume because of ADHD and perhaps some of the trouble focusing and getting down to work and into a rhythm, Bob's having trouble with time as well. So where someone else might have 8 hours a day they can dedicate to doing this thing they love, Bob's down to like 6, 4, maybe 2 hours on a bad day. We all know what it can be like to be Bob from time to time, right? So now there's a lot less time. And if you go from 8 hours to 4 hours of time in a day, think about what that impact really is. When it comes to finding success in any field, you're usually competing with people at the highest level, and those people are going to be committing as much time as they possibly can. So if you can only commit half as much time, how's that ultimately going to impact you? Well, one of the ways it may impact you is it might hurt your confidence. So Bob gets started down this journey, but because he's having trouble focusing, because he's not able to figure out time as much, maybe isn't as organized, distracted, jumps around, all sorts of things that can happen, he's ultimately not getting the results that he thought he should get. And so his confidence is taking a hit. Even if Bob came into things being relatively confident, thinking, you know what, I can take this on. I can do this thing. I love this thing. It's something I've always been passionate about. Well, now he's not getting the results he wanted. He's not seeing the progress. And so his confidence is taking more and more of a hit. Well, let's jump back to these first couple things, focus and time. The less confident someone is in their ability to succeed in a task, the more likely they are to procrastinate that task, to avoid it, to put it off, to make excuses, etc., which kind of makes sense, right? None of us like to fail. So if you didn't believe you're capable of doing something, would you be that enthusiastic to do that thing where you think you're going to fail at it, right? Kind of common sense when you actually break it down that way. Now we could take a look at peers and accountability and all that. Maybe when Bob started, he was really, really pumped up and he said, I'm going to keep myself accountable, I'm going to follow through, and was even an inspiration to friends where it helped his peer group. People came and said, Bob, you're this inspiring guy. Oh my God, I am so excited to be around you and spend time with you. But over the first couple weeks or couple months, because he's having trouble focusing, he's having trouble staying on task, Bob's confidence is taking a hit. And he's expressing more and more self-doubt. Maybe he's complaining more. Maybe he's becoming a bit more pessimistic because he thought everything was going to be awesome, but it's not. And so he's thinking, maybe all those cynical people were right. Maybe doing something you love, maybe working for yourself, maybe it's total, absolute BS. And he's expressing these views to his peers, to his friends. And what do you think his successful friends are thinking? Well, maybe initially they're thinking, hey, Bob, I want to help you out. No, cheer up. Let me take a look at your business. Let me help you out. But over time, what they're thinking is block Bob's phone number. We don't need a downer. Now, this might sound harsh, but people who are doing something significant with their lives tend to be extremely choosy with who they spend time with because they know how powerful their peer group can be in a positive or negative way. And that does not mean they drop their friends at the first sign of trouble, but it does mean that the sort of people Bob would want to be around to inspire him to kick ass and really succeed at this are going to be less and less interested in spending time with him. The more he struggles, the more he starts maybe complaining or losing focus, etc., etc. Of course, this has a massive impact on accountability. If you or the people around you see you failing to follow through on the thing you said you would follow through on for weeks or months at a time, at a certain point, people go from, hey, let's put some positive pressure on this person, to don't be so hard on them. They're going through a tough time. And maybe even Bob's self-image changes, where he started out as someone who was reliable and took action and followed through and all that. And then now is doubting all that. All these parts of his identity that were once really strong aren't there anymore. So now when Bob says, hey, I'm going to finish this blog post today, even Bob's like, no, I'm not. That's not going to happen. So now maybe we're at a point where Bob, who had all the potential, the intelligence, the peer group, the creativity, the mindset to make this thing happen, who took all the steps needed to overcome fear and actually get into something, which is beyond huge. Bob deserves all the accolades in the world. Because of this one trait, or perhaps series of traits in the case of ADHD, he's found himself in this cycle, which of course is going to impact the last area here, which is money. Even just the time aspect of only being able to work half or 3/4 the focused hours you anticipated, that alone is going to have a financial impact. But add in things like wasted days due to feeling down or worrying about whether you're capable, insecurity, overwhelm, all these sorts of things that can come up. And by the way, the feeling of overwhelm, there's a lot of causes behind that, but one of them is tied to confidence, because part of overwhelm is not feeling that you can take on all these things. There's a lot more to it, and some of it can be some organizational tricks as well, but that is one thing to really consider. So the more you might struggle, the more your confidence takes a hit, the more overwhelm you might experience, which of course, as we all know, overwhelm is brutal for eating up our time. So now money becomes an issue. And now little things might come up. Maybe his car breaks down, or there's a screw up with his phone company and they've tried to charge him an extra $100 and he's sort of stuck paying it, but he doesn't have that money. And where before, maybe he'd have had the money, or if he didn't, he'd have had the mindset, the energy, the time, the confidence to just handle it, to get on the phone with them for an hour, work his charming magic. Us ADHD people can be sometimes charming or persuasive, and have it dealt with. Now it's just another nail in the coffin. And ultimately, each of these things keeps adding on each other and creating this vicious cycle that leads to a point where Bob's not only experiencing the struggles I've discussed here, but maybe anxiety. It makes sense, right? If the thing you're working on is not going nearly as well as you thought, you're probably going to be anxious because you're unconscious, like, what's going on? This is not good. And what happens when you're anxious all the time, when you're struggling with confidence, when you're not happy of your life circumstance? Well, perhaps some level of depression is likely to pop up. Actually, ADHD is very commonly the cause of many other diagnosed issues. So now things have got pretty bad, and Bob's like, okay, I'm gonna go see a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist looks and says, well, you're feeling anxiety, you're feeling depression, you have low self-confidence, okay, I can get you the drugs for this and the treatment for this and that and that. And this video is not about drugs, by the way, but if you are in America or Canada, that's probably their first line of attack for sure, which is usually not the best case after knowing someone for an hour. Ultimately, there's all these symptoms that are there, but what was the underlying cause? What is really there? It's the ADHD. And the ADHD created the mental landscape that allowed in some of the anxiety and depression and self-doubt. And ultimately, that also led to the real world situation that caused some of these. It makes sense if you're really unhappy with your life and you're stressed and you don't believe in yourself to feel depressed. I'm not saying you should feel depressed, but that's not irrational, right? It makes sense. So When you have a life that you're really unhappy with, you're going to have other negative traits. But going all the way back to the beginning, it's some core ADHD traits that led to all these other causes. I hope I've done an okay job explaining this so far. This may be one of those videos that I sit back and I really script it in detail and remake it at some point. Let me know in the comments if that's something you think I should do. But this is a pattern I've seen so much, and I don't know if I'm able to articulate it perfectly yet, but it's something that I see and understand through my work with clients so much. And on the flip side, with certain friends, I've seen those people that I've known for a decade who have some positive traits that they do over and over and over and over. And you see the result and you look at where they're at now and think, wow, they must be this elite person. Like if you met them for the first time, you'd think that there was something magical. But it's not actually. It's been a series of a couple traits repeating and building on each other and creating these cycles that just make someone absolutely unstoppable in the other direction. And so what I really want to encourage you to do is, whether or not you are someone with ADHD or whether or not you're following this video for one of the reasons I said earlier, that it really applies to any sort of personality traits or ongoing behaviors, that you think back to what are those behaviors and look at dealing with those. And that's going to change things because each day compounds. And if you find that you're wasting even a couple hours a day, then that's going to compound and get worse and worse and worse over time. And then you're going to pick up some of these other negative traits. So whether you're someone with ADHD or who thinks you may, or you're someone who's an ENFP like myself, or someone else with some rather strong personality traits that can be really positive and awesome, but also sometimes have some consequences, I hope you'll take this video and think about what's at the core and really analyze your days and your weeks, even just for a week. Kind of write down everything you do within that week and think about what could be at the core of results that are below your expectations. And look at changing that, because ultimately that will have a much larger impact than trying to treat some of the other symptoms one by one. By the way, I mentioned some of the positive traits if you're an ENFP. Well, ADHD is full of positive traits and things that make us absolutely awesome. But that is something we'll have to save for another video. I do publish videos each and every week. My name is Dan. This is Dreams Around the World. My mission is to help you become the best version of yourself, all while creating the most awesome life possible for you and those you love. And if perhaps, like me, you tend to be a little bit impatient, I have a whole series of videos on adult ADHD that you can get started with right now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you soon.